You know, we often ask ourselves, why do wars happen? And maybe even more importantly, how do we build a lasting peace? Well, the answers, they're not just found in history books or on battlefields. Turns out, a lot of it is happening right inside our own heads. So today, we're going to explore the psychology of why we fight and, crucially, how we can start to heal.
All right, to kick things off, let me ask you a question. It's about a conflict we all feel like we know pretty well. Who do you think was most responsible for the Allied victory in World War II? Go on, get an answer in your head. Because what researchers found when they asked this exact question is, honestly, mind-blowing. So, check this out. Researchers went to people in 8 different Allied countries, right? And they asked them to estimate their own nation's contribution to the war effort. Pretty straightforward. But when they added up all those percentages, they got this, 309%. Wait, what? How is that even possible?
Yeah, obviously the math just doesn't add up. I mean, you can't have more than 100%. This wild over-claiming of responsibility, it tells us something really important. It shows that even when we're on the same side, our memories of a shared event can be completely different. It's a puzzle that goes deep into our psychology, and it really shines a light on just how subjective our national stories truly are.
So what in the world is behind this massive distortion of memory? Well, it turns out there are a few really powerful mental shortcuts or biases that are kind of running the show in the background, shaping how we see our own country's place in history.
Okay, first up, you've got something called ethnocentrism. It's basically our natural tendency to see the world with our own country smack dab in the center of the story. I mean, think about it, right? When you're in school, your history classes probably spent way more time on what your nation did than on anyone else's role. And that constant focus, well, it naturally inflates how important we think we are in the grand scheme of things.
Next, there's something called the availability heuristic. It's a fancy term for a simple idea. Our brains tend to give more weight to information that pops into our heads most easily. The researchers have a great analogy for this. It's like asking a married couple who does more of the housework. You know what happens, right? Both of them are probably going to overestimate their own contribution, simply because their own efforts are what they see and remember most clearly. Well, it's the exact same thing with nations. And finally, to complete this picture, you've got what's called my side bias. We are just wired to favor any information that confirms what we already want to believe, which is usually that our group, our nation, is just a little bit better, a little more special. So when you mix these 3 powerful biases together, ethnocentrism, the availability heuristic, and my side bias, you get what some researchers call collective narcissism. It's a state where we all basically become the undisputed heroes of our own national epic.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. This isn't just about abstract psychological ideas. This stuff actually plays out on a neurological level. These biases, they reflect a very real biological battle that's happening inside our brains whenever we're faced with conflict.
So inside our heads, we basically have 2 competing systems. You've got the amygdala. Think of this as your emotional brain. It's lightning fast, it's our built-in threat detector, it's super primal and incredibly powerful. And then you have the prefrontal cortex. That's our rational brain. It's slower, more deliberate, more logical, and its main job is to put the brakes on the amygdala. But, and this is a big but, in high-stakes, scary situations, that emotional amygdala can completely hijack the whole system.
And here's where this gets really dangerous. Some leaders, well, they understand this internal brain battle perfectly, and they exploit it. They use fear, they use emotionally charged language to speak directly to our amygdala, completely bypassing our logical, rational brain. They essentially create an environment of constant threat. And then, wouldn't you know it, they offer themselves up as the only strong leader who can save the day.
So, the crucial point here is that our brains are pretty much hardwired for this kind of tribalism. We naturally, almost automatically, create an us and a them. In fact, neuroimaging studies have shown that the parts of our brain linked to empathy actually become less active when we see someone from an outgroup in pain. It's a biological root of conflict, baked right into our hardware.
And of course, when this biological tendency erupts into actual real-world conflict, it leaves devastating scars. And these wounds, they don't just vanish when the fighting stops. The trauma echoes, sometimes for generations, and it always hits the most vulnerable people the hardest.
I mean, look at the research on children in war zones. It reveals this absolutely heartbreaking cycle. It starts with a child being exposed to the unimaginable horrors of war. That trauma can then lead to behavioral problems, anger, irritability.
Now think about the parents. They're also traumatized. They're under incredible stress, and they might respond with harsher parenting. And that response just reinforces the child's trauma, embedding the violence of war right into the very fabric of the family.
Okay, so if our minds can lead us down this dark path into conflict and keep that trauma going, then they must also hold the key to building peace. But let's stop for a second. What does peace actually mean? Like from a psychological point of view.
Well, peace psychologists make a really critical distinction here. On one hand, you have what's called negative peace. That's just the absence of direct violence. The fighting is stopped, it's a ceasefire. But then there's positive peace, and this is so much deeper. This is about the presence of things like justice, human rights, and well-being. It's about building a society where the actual root causes of the conflict have been dealt with.
Right, so getting to that kind of positive, lasting peace, that takes a real deliberate process of healing. It doesn't just happen. So for this last part, let's actually look at a kind of roadmap for psychological reconciliation after a conflict is over. Okay, so researchers have basically laid out a 5-step framework for this kind of healing. Step 1, you have to confront your shared history. That means not shying away from the painful stuff, but actually facing it head on. Step 2 is humanization. This is where former enemies have to acknowledge each other's suffering and recognize their shared humanity. From there, you can move to Step 3, building a new collective memory, finding goals and values you now share. And that leads to Step 4, the formation of new knowledge, debunking all the old propaganda and stereotypes. And finally, all of this culminates in Step 5, restorative justice, which is all about healing relationships, not just punishing people.
And you know, this really brings us full circle, right back to where we started. There's this incredible quote from the UN Constitution that just perfectly captures everything we've been talking about. It says that if wars begin in the minds of men, then it's in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. It's all a mental process.
So I guess the ultimate question isn't really about nations or armies or leaders. It's about each one of us. If war truly begins in the mind, where does peace begin for you?